Hello, team. Thanks for tuning in to the Clemson Drone Podcast. Before we start the pod, I just want to take a quick minute to let you know about our brand new comprehensive 2-course online program. This is something we just launched in February and are super pumped about. It starts off with our 8-week UAS vocation course. In this class, you'll earn your Part 107 license, learn to fly with our simulator, create maps and models using Drone Deploy, and become a Level 1 thermographer. After that, we're excited to announce our brand new course called UAS Mission Administration. This class is designed for current pilots and UAS program leaders. Over 8 weeks, we'll cover enhanced general knowledge, advanced mission planning, and you'll create your organization's custom standard operating procedure manual using our cutting-edge AI tools. At the end of the course, you'll earn AUVSI's Level 1, 2, and 3 Trusted Operator certifications. Check it all out at clemsondrone.com. Now, back to the pod. Welcome to the Clemson Drone Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Burgett from Clemson University. Join me as I dive into the world of drone technology and explore its impact through the eyes of industry leaders. Hear how drone technology directly supports public agencies, private companies, and entrepreneurs from those leading the innovation. If you're a seasoned UAS program manager or just getting into the game, this is a place to learn from the best to help your program soar to new heights. Make sure you subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss a single episode of the Clemson Drone Podcast. At Clemson Drone, the sky is not the limit, it's just the beginning. Hello, everyone. This is Joe Burgett with Clemson University. It's great to be back with another episode of the Clemson Drone Podcast. We are joined by Ben Fowler, who I first met as a graduate student at Clemson University. He took my drone class to help out with his PhD research and then what later turned out to be another vertical for his business. I'm really looking forward to talking with him about that. So with that, Ben, welcome to the show.
Yeah, Joe, Dr. Drone, very excited to be here. You know, pod or no pod, I think this conversation's been in the making, so glad to be here.
All right, awesome. Well, I appreciate that. Well, so we got lots of stuff to talk about, but before we get there, it's kind of always nice to know a little bit about the guest and kind of your backstory. So let's start by kind of talking about your academic journey. I know you're an Atlanta native and you got your BA in Spanish and I think biology also, right, from UNC Asheville. And then you kind of moved into the natural resource management space. But can you kind of talk us through a little bit about that, what your history and your journey has been?
Yeah. So in a nutshell, I am from Atlanta, born and raised actually about 15 minutes right outside the city. So when you're from Atlanta, it's OTP versus ITP, inside the perimeter, outside the perimeter. So definitely an ITP kid. But the academic journey has kind of been spread out over time. I'm 35 now, but I originally, yes, went to UNC Asheville there in the mountains, a great, wonderful place. And then after that, I took about 7 years off. And so in Asheville, and then during those 7 years, I really gravitated toward the outdoor recreation space. And I was doing a lot of different guiding, leading trips. So taking kids, taking people outdoors, climbing, biking, paddling, the what have you. Then I decided, well, I really want to go back into academia, try to increase my knowledge of these experiences that I've had. And then I gravitated towards UGA. And so UGA is the Warnell School of Forestry. And they had at the time, and they still do, similar to what we have at Clemson, a Parks, Recreation, and Tourism Management program. It was a very small program, but it was embedded within the forestry and natural resource management program. So I think actually on my diploma, it says my master's of science, it says natural resources. But then I was part of that smaller program. And then after that, I was actually at a conference in Athens, Outdoor Recreation, Parks and Tourism Management Conference, and met a mutual friend of ours, my advisor, Dr. Matt Brownlee, and went to Clemson's PRTM, Parks, Recreation, Tourism Management Program. And then within that is the conservation, the PCOR program, so the Parks, Conservation, Outdoor Recreation Management.
Gotcha. And so as you said, you're getting your dissertation right now. So at a high level, what's kind of like what's your dissertation about and what's kind of the problem you're trying to look at?
Right. Yes, the question we all love. My dissertation at a very high level is really about how to improve access and then experiences around rivers. And so I particularly am interested in paddlers, like recreational paddlers. So, canoeists, kayakers, stand-up paddle boarders, anyone that gets out on the water, for human powered recreation. So I'm interested in that whole experience. But on the other level, I'm looking at how to solve management problems. So how do we manage those visitors or those paddlers? I'm interested in the types of methods we use to evaluate those experiences, and really just trying to learn what tools or innovative technology can we use to solve visitor use management problems that are based on in social science. So a visitor's experience or a recreationist experience outdoors.
Okay, awesome. And I read this in your bio that like right now, at least as I'm recording this with you, you're traveling about, and you've been traveling for, I think it's almost for a year with your wife and a couple of kids in a 28-foot trailer. Is that right?
Yeah. I threw that at the end of the bio, and I was wondering if I should put that on there. But yeah, it's pretty cool. I'm in my sixth year of the PhD, the dissertation program. So when I was in high school, my friends that stuck around a little longer were super seniors, and I feel like I'm a super I don't even know what I'd call myself, but
Super candidate.
yes, right, super candidate. I am a PhD candidate. That's correct. But last year, around May 2023, I had started the business, which I know we'll talk about. But my wife and I, it was just the kind of right place, right time. We didn't want to go and buy a house. We necessarily didn't have the money for that, but we knew we wanted to travel, and we were game for it. So yeah, so we have a 28-foot trailer that we pull around with a truck. It's a travel trailer. We travel all around the country,
That's so amazing.
pretty much from project to project. So it's an interesting lifestyle. Yeah, I've got two small kids, so it's a story every day.
Yeah, man, that's the best. And I know that
Yeah.
when you're older, I don't even want to put a number on it as I kind of advance whatever number that would be. I think you're going to look back on this on this decision like, man, I was able to do it. I did it. Not a lot of people are able to do that, and that's great. Well, so you mentioned your business, so that's a pretty good segue. Your company, PARKS360. Why don't you just kind of set the table a little bit by, let's start with logistics. Is it just you? Do you got a crew? Tell us a little about what it is, the clients you support, the product you deliver. Kind of the high level overview of your business.
Yeah. So Parks 360, and I'll just dip back into my academic journey just for some motivation. But when I was guiding, especially for river trips, I was taking sometimes 100, 150 people out on a river. So these would be weekend long trips. And I really, in planning these trips and traveling and doing all these things, I really got ingrained with managers, like planning trips, talking to managers. And that's where I got interested in the management of these natural resources.
Right.
And so fast forward into Parks 360 and take everything I learned in my master's and all these tools and the exposure I got in the PhD program. I wanted to create a business, a consulting business, but also kind of a technology startup business where we really explored parks, from all angles, from a 360 kind of full circle. Like I wanted to immerse myself in understanding these parks, what their problems were. So, in a nutshell, Parks 360 right now, it is a consulting business. I want to work with managers and parks to solve problems. But the niche is also the 360, because in my research at Clemson, I was getting into the 360 realm of panoramic imagery. Right. And so that led me to several experiences in sort of this niche world of taking, drone-based or ground-based or even boat-based, which we can talk about, this 360 imagery. So Parks 360, it's a consulting business. I help parks understand their problems, but as sort of this baseline foundation, we visually map 360 like virtual tours for the places that we go. So we use that as kind of a management framework or a baseline to talk through a park, understand it visually, understand these aspects, right, discuss problems. And so yeah, that's kind of a long answer, but that's the motivation for it.
No, that's a great answer too. And you had mentioned drones again. Obviously, we're gonna talk about that. And maybe that's a good time to start that now. So Parks 360, again, it's your business, it's your company, kind of not sole proprietor, but you're the owner operator, so to speak. But
Yep.
you do, a lot of different, you have different clients, different parks. Parks are managed by different organizations, state, federal. So you've got,
Right.
a kind of a wide range there.
Right.
So let's kind of your entrepreneur spirit. I think at some point in time you had asked me about you're looking to pick up some drone work, and you took this class for your research or whatever, but you saw some opportunity to bring in some additional revenue. And I think, and I don't remember the avenue, if it was in person, if it was on a Zoom call or an email or whatever, but I think the advice I gave you was that if you're just starting to get into the drone business, a kind of a low cost way, low risk way is to join one of these service provider networks. And for those of you guys who are listening to this, who may not be familiar with what a drone service provider is, think of Uber, but for drones, kind of a similar business model. And I think you might have asked me that question, and I think that was the answer I gave you.
Right.
So, kind of with that as a backdrop, tell us about your experience with working for a drone service provider.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly what happened. I remember being in your class, and I think one of the days you mentioned these Uber for drone services, Fly Guys and Drone Hive, and the like you said, the entrepreneur spirit. I immediately latched onto that, and I think even probably while I was going through the your course, I was just opening up a tab and trying to look at what these companies were all about. And yeah, I think your advice was go ahead and apply to all of them. I mean, why not?
Right.
If you want to get started. At the time, this would have been early 2023. I didn't even have a drone yet, but I was looking at these jobs. I knew I was potentially going to have my first job, which we can talk about.
Yeah.
And I applied. I applied to Fly Guys, Drone Hive, a bunch of different ones. And I believe it was Fly Guys that got back to me first.
Yep.
And I don't know exactly when they got started, but it was still very much in kind of the startup, or at least it felt like that, but very organized, and got back to me. And yeah, I mean, I can talk about that experience.
Yeah, well, why don't you? I mean, so that's great. I think they actually, if I remember right, they got started around 2018 or so, so a couple of years after Part 107. But
Yeah.
So talk to me about your first job. So you join the network, whatever. They reach out to you. What was your first job?
Yeah, so I think I emailed you after that job because I was certainly nervous going into it. But the first job was actually right outside of the Atlanta airport.
Okay.
So Atlanta airport, one of the largest, busiest airports in the
All right,
world.
super easy.
About super easy. And I grew up next to this airport, so to speak, and so I knew that what a beast of an airport this was. And here I am, fresh Part 107, super eager to get my first job, and then I get this. And I think long story short, it brought everything together that we had done in class, whether it was I had to apply for an FAA authorization. It was 0-foot,
Okay.
length. So I had to go through the whole authorization process to get started there. I was, very nervous about listening to ATC traffic and understanding my METARs and my CTAFs, and I was going back through the manual. I wanted to be completely ready for this, and so, Fly Guys, they initially send you the job. They give you like an SOP, and they give you what your mission is, so to
Right.
speak. They give you a on the ground contact name where you're supposed to once you get there to the site, you're supposed to contact them.
Right.
And this site was a quarry site, and so gosh, I don't know how many acres, but at least maybe 200 300 acre site.
Big site.
Yeah, it was a big site, and so the job was to show up there. There are aircraft that are landing every minute, taking off and landing, manned aircraft,
Right.
and you're flying right there beside them. And so yeah, I mean, I can get into that experience showing
Yeah.
up and what that was like.
Well, let me ask you this. So two questions. First off, the first question is like, what kind of data were you collecting? I mean, you said quarry, so I'm assuming that you were, collecting data for maybe a 3D model or something like that. And then the second
Yeah,
question,
yeah.
kind of follow up there, is before you got the job, did you already have the drone? And then what drone was it that you had?
Yeah, okay. So great questions. Well, we'll start with the drone. So after I got my Part 107, I believe in March 2023, actually my 2 years is coming up here. I think I was emailing you about getting recertified. But The first drone that I got right after I got the Part 107 was a Mavic 3E, and that's the drone that I still
Yeah.
use, the Mavic 3 Enterprise drone. And I can talk about I have acquired some other drones. That's really my workhorse. And the mission was photogrammetry. So it was autonomous mapping mission linking up with drone deploy. That's the other thing, how I talked
Yeah.
about everything I just learned, and now I had to apply it with this job. It was a mapping mission with drone deploy. So I think they were using it for some cut and fill
Yeah.
analysis. But yeah, it was a photogrammetry mapping mission.
Well, and you mentioned it, and I can't remember if when you took the class, if we were using drone deploy. We use drone deploy now. Refresh my memory. Is that what we had in the class at that time?
Yeah, so
Okay.
I believe it was a whole module that was devoted to it, or at least it was embedded within another one.
Right.
But it was basically, yeah, kind of going through the steps of putting a drone deploy mission together and all the different settings
Right.
and
Right.
whatnot. So, I mean, without that, I don't think I would have been able to accept my first job.
Well, awesome. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't remember because there was another photogrammetry structure for motion software solution we had used in the past, and right about that time we had made the switch over, and it was a really good one that we were using. It was just kind of a little bit of a heavy lift to learn, and drone deploy is really intuitive, so that kind of worked out really well
Yeah.
for our class. Okay, so that was your first job, and then you said you've got some additional equipment now. What are some of the equipment that you purchased since then?
Yeah, so I have a Matrice 350.
Hmm.
It's another, DJI. It's a big drone. You can put multiple, sensors on
Right.
there, super high resolution cameras, and the lidar sensors and whatnot. But funny enough, I don't use any sensors on that drone, and I'm still, working on this, but I'm actually rigging it up to carry 360 cameras, kind of getting back to Parks
Oh, right.
360
Sure.
and the sort of niche of panoramic imagery. So I have that drone, and then I've got like a Mavic Air 2, I believe, or I
Yeah.
just got it. I just got it from a friend. It's kind of a backup drone, so I haven't flown it too much. But the main drone I'm using is the Mavic 3E.
Yeah, no, that would makes a lot of sense too, because it's lightweight, and you kind of going into more rural. Rural is an understatement, but real
Right.
natural environments, it makes sense. Well, before I do, just one more question about that first job, which was a complicated job, and then I want to kind of talk more about like typical jobs. But for that
Right.
complicated job, again, you're a novice pilot, you're going out there, and you got this one. Of course, you got the knowledge you got from class, but there's a world difference between class and your first job where you actually have to do it, and there's a client and deliverables. How did Fly Guy? I mean, did they support you, especially in that busy environment? What was it that I know they gave you some SOPs, but if you had questions and things like that, was there a contact there that they could help you with?
Oh yeah, again, it was the first job, so it was new for everybody, them working with me and me working with them. But yes, it was fairly organized. I had a mission coordinator or a project coordinator, and that was my main point of contact. They would send me the details of my client on the ground. However, just like any job where you're kind of representing, you're essentially a subcontractor, working for this
Right.
company. And my experience just as an outdoor guide and teaching and whatnot, you show up to a place and you kind of act like you know what you're doing. So I had the contact, but you had to, I had my helmet on and all my gear on and stuff like that. So I felt prepared, but as soon as I showed up, that was kind of, now it was my turn to drive. I needed to reach out to the contact, find them. It was a big quarry site, so there's just trucks, and there was a dump site there. People were dumping things, coming in and out, weighing their loads, and
Yeah.
pretty complicated site. And there were signs that don't leave your vehicle without the road, the blocks under the tires, so they
Oh,
rolled.
wow.
So very overwhelming. But found my contact, and they kind of drove me out to a site where they had one other drone operator fly it before, and they said, hey, this is a good place with some visual line of sight where you can map this. And so yes, I felt prepared, but there's another part of the story, again, working with drone deploy and that whole aspect, which was I learned a lot that first day. Let's just say
Okay.
that.
Awesome. Well, I mean, you're kind of teasing out there. What was it that happened?
Well, so it was an RTK mission, and so that was my first time working with RTK. Of course, we learned about it in class, but with drone deploy, I think it was relatively new. But there was this sort of RTK
Yeah.
network. So essentially, you hook up your drone to drone deploy. You get ready for your mission. Got to connect to that RTK network. And then I guess, the biggest thing was I'm flying this fairly large site where I had to do multiple battery
Mm.
swaps. And so that was my first time doing that. So I'm trying to navigate this RTK network space, and I didn't know at the time, but if the signal drops and it turns red, you pretty much the whole time you're making sure that you're in signal, because otherwise it's not getting those corrections to those photos. And we'll probably talk about this later, but the risk in it, if you don't get high quality data, you're not going to get paid for the mission. That's all on
Right, right,
you.
right.
And so I'm trying to make sure the RTK stays in network, having to do these battery swaps. At the time, I don't think there's so many glitches now, but there were definitely some glitches in that I would have to do a battery swap, and then the software, it would delink from the mission. And so then I go back and I'm trying to find, oh well, where did I last
I see.
take my last photo to start. So it was relatively complicated. I lost connection a few times where then I had to go back, they return to home and whatnot. So
Right.
it was just a complicated mission.
Those are just some of those things that you don't know till you do it, and it's
Exactly.
a learning thing. So so that was that was obviously a complicated mission, but since that time, if this animal exists, what is a typical UAS job that you've done through Fly Guys?
Yeah, so for Fly Guys, I would say a lot of it is either autonomous mapping, like photogrammetry missions that you're syncing up to drone deploy,
Hmm.
or it's like marketing and real estate, or just taking photos of areas from they'll send you, they say, hey, we need 200 photos of this ground site. So one example, there's a bunch of investors somewhere, they want to buy a piece of property, they contact me, I go out and take a bunch of different photos, videos, different angles, really kind of survey the site, a visual analysis for the site. And so I would say it's really between those two things. So these autonomous mapping, photogrammetry missions, and then more of these just data visualization, where I'm taking high resolution photos and videos to inform management or potential purchasing of a property. I've done I've taken pictures of like a Popeyes, for
Okay.
example, where it was a brand new Popeyes, and they wanted to do marketing for that, which that was actually a lot of fun. And so there's also some of the marketing aspects of that as
Well,
well.
awesome.
I guess one more example, I took images of a new bar that was being built, where they needed this was an RTK mission, and the roof next door to the bar, they wanted to basically project a like a hologram or a virtual scene of
Wow.
like these gnomes and stuff hiding behind the AC and the different things on top of the roof.
Yeah.
And so they need a really detailed image of that roof. And
Ah.
so that's another example of a mission.
Well, awesome. That's awesome. Well, listen, final question here as we wrap things up here. Let's just say, someone were to come to you who is interested in, getting into the UAS space, looking to use drones as a side job. I mean, similar to what you did maybe, but a little bit of experience, took the course, for example, has a drone, a commercial drone, Mavic 3E or what have you. What advice would you give that person? Would you have given them any, advice that maybe different than I had, or gave you rather, or something that you might, advise them to do a little different, or maybe just follow the same path? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I do think a lot about this question. I think on one hand, there's always kind of the cliche business answer. Really try to find out more about what it means to manage a business. That's been a huge growing step. I wish even in the drone class, we talk about some insurance and some of the things behind starting a business, but you really don't know until you get into it. I guess the other side, kind of a spectrum, is one, just the reward of having your own business and going out and kind of doing your first project and getting paid, and just that feeling of accomplishment doing your own work. But on the other side is understanding the risk, kind of going out and doing something. I alluded to this talking about my work with Fly Guys and whatnot, but you go out there, you've got your equipment, you're funding yourself, you're doing these projects, and if you don't finish the job or have deliver a quality product, you're not going to get paid. And a lot of what I've been doing, you feel that risk. You're going out and you want to do a good job.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I mean, I guess maybe just kind of one follow up here is, because again, I would imagine if someone is interested in in pursuing this route, but then they hear you say that, you collect data, but it's not high quality or something went wrong, you don't get paid. And again, that's going to raise, that probably some alarm bells. So maybe what are the top, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 things that you might tell somebody to, these are the things that could influence the mission or whatever, that maybe be aware of, that you capture everything or recapture it before you leave, just to avoid, doing work and then not getting paid.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the number one thing is understanding your mission and your criteria, what product that you need to deliver. The other part is, the mission planning. When you get a location, I'm constantly, or not constantly, but before I head out, I'm looking at that site, trying to understand it, kind of what issues, where might I actually launch from, so I have good visual line of sight. And then, of course, it's as simple as making sure you've got your SD card, some of these, your batteries charged, you've done firmware updates, making sure everything is ready to go with that drone. But, I haven't had to ever go back and refly a mission, thankfully.
Okay.
But it's just, I do think, though, it's being extra cautious when you're out there, especially, for example, like when the RTK. So I'm mapping, the RTK network drops out. That means, I've got several photos that might not have the corrections they need.
Right.
And so then it's being able to adapt, understand the software, so you can go back and maybe retake some of that,
Right.
to do that. So really understanding the mission criteria. And most importantly, as soon as you get back, one of my favorite things after I've flown the drone, and still to this day, I can't wait to look at the data.
Yeah.
I can't wait to put it in my computer, see the imagery, see the video.
Right.
And so don't, finish a mission and go home and leave your drone in the car and, get in there, upload, back up that data, because that data is what you're delivering.
Right. All right. It's the cash in hand right there. So, well, listen, man, that is perfect. I think we'll leave it there. Ben, thank you so very much for being on the show. And for all you guys that are listening out there, thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to doing this again on the next Clemson Drone podcast.
Thank you so much. This was really, really great.
All right, we're out. Thanks for listening to the Clemson Drone podcast. Don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Learn more about our online training offerings by going to clemsondrone.com. Thanks again. And remember, at Clemson Drone, the sky's not the limit. It's just the beginning. Thank you for listening to the Clemson Drone podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, I'd appreciate it if you could leave a 5-star rating and write a review. I'm told this makes a big difference in the algorithms used to recommend the podcast to others. Thank you.